A very good afternoon, a very warm welcome to all the participants and our very special guest speaker, Professor D. Nagesh Kumar, for the session of Enviro Web Talk 2021. Time is 12 noon according to the Indian Standard Time, and I, Uman Bhatt, a student of School of Civil Engineering, Lovely Professional University, will be your co-chair for the session. Dear sir, on behalf of School of Civil Engineering, Lovely Professional University, I welcome you for the session on the topic Remote Sensing, GIS, and DEM applications for flood monitoring. The session is chaired by Mr. Jaspreet Singh, Assistant Professor, School of Civil Engineering, Lovely Professional University, and will be co-chaired by me. So, to welcome you on board, I would like request my faculty member Jaspreet sir to kindly take over the session as chair and start the proceedings. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Man. I am truly elated to introduce and welcome Professor Nagesh Kumar to our audience. We have who have joined us on the Google Meet platform. Professor D. Nagesh Kumar received the PhD degree from Department of Civil Engineering, IISc Bangalore in 1992. He has been a professor with the Department of Civil Engineering, IISc, since May 2002. Presently, he is holding the Professor Satish Dhawan Chair Professor position. He was the former chairman, Center for the Earth Sciences, IISc Bangalore during 2014 to 2020. Earlier, he was with IIT Kharagpur, India in 1994 to 2002 and the National Remote Sensing Center, Hyderabad in 1992 to 1994. He was a Boycast Fellow with the Utah Water Research Laboratory, Utah State University, Logan, USA in 1999 and visiting professor in EMSC Saint Etienne, France in 2012. His research interests including climate hydrology, climate change, water resources system, deep learning, fuzzy logic, MCDM, and remote sensing and GIS application in a water resource engineering. He has supervised 10 postdocs, 1 in progress, and 22 PhD, and which is out of which 7 in progress. He is also a co-author of 8 textbooks and published more than 216 papers, including 128 peer-reviewed journals. He is editor-in-chief of Journal of Water and Climate Hydrology, IAW Publishings, UK, and associate editors for ASC Journals of Hydrology Engineering. He is recipient of IBM Faculty Awards with the outstanding contribution in modeling hydrologic extremes using a microwave remote sensing. So it's a great profile. Now for the audience, during the session, if you have a question, you can put the same in the chat box or you may ask at the end by unmuting yourself. Your questions will be taken care by the expert at the end. Till then, please keep yourself muted and your video should be turned off. Now the session is hand over to you, sir. Please continue.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jaspreet Singh. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
You are loud.
we can hear you. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. It's wonderful. It's very nice of you to introduce me to the audience. And Mr. Uman, thank you very much. I wish to first of all congratulate Dr. Amit Srivastava and his colleagues and his team for organizing such a wonderful online webinar on collecting very good number of resource persons, not necessarily me, but very good number of resource persons. And it's a big achievement in this pandemic situation to engage researchers on a very important topic with a wide variety of speakers across the world. So I sincerely appreciate and congratulate Amit and his team for doing this. I fondly call him Amit because he was our PhD student, but now he is Professor Amit. Okay. What I would like to do is, let me start sharing my screen. Okay. So, I hope my screen is visible now.
Yes, sir. It is visible.
Thank you very much. So what we will do is, I'll try to present some of these tools like remote sensing, GIS, and DEM, and try to utilize them for flood monitoring. In a 1 hour session. So basically, I'd like to briefly mention about each one of them. First of all, we'll briefly talk about floods and potential use of remote sensing. Then how we can improve it further if we try to use GIS for flood damage assessment, and further assessment or further improvement through DEM. Idea is, if we try to use these three tools, remote sensing, GIS, and DEM together, we shall be able to do a great service in those places where the flood damage is occurring. And it's only not in terms of assessment, but also in terms of mitigation and its management, especially if it happens in the near future. How do you work on that? So in that context, I try to propose a very small but very effective, very simple but very effective approach to delineate flood-prone areas using one topographic index, and demonstrate it for Mahanadi River Basin in our country. And then at the end, I will briefly talk about what World Meteorological Organization now is trying to call as an integrated approach to flood management. Don't try to treat flood as a waste water, but try to utilize that water. So in that context, I'll briefly talk about that and conclude based on that. So this is what I'm going to do as far as today's presentation is concerned. As we know, floods are the most common and widespread of all the natural disasters that we encounter, like others like drought, earthquake, etc. Now, floods cause damage to houses, industries, public utilities, and property, resulting in huge economic losses apart from loss of lives and habitat. Though it's not possible to control the flood disaster totally, by adopting suitable structural and non-structural measures, the flood damages can be minimized. One typical example for structural measure could be to construct a dam or construct a levee, construct a bund, etc. And non-structural, if you already have some system in place, how do we operate or how do we bring that into control? For example, how much water you should store in the reservoir versus how much you should leave from the reservoir. That's a non-structural measure. Okay, so such things can be better done if we have some very good real-time information. So that real-time information can be obtained substantially through remote sensing, and that's what we are going to study. It can be used for flood disaster management, preparedness, as well as prevention and relief. In all these aspects, remote sensing can play a vital role. Like, first of all, talk about flood inundation mapping itself and then monitoring. Then rapid and scientific based damage assessment. I'll illustrate that. Okay. And monitoring and mapping of flood control works, if there are any. We will not be doing in today's session, but it's something like if you have a levee or if bank erosion is going to take place in the river bank, then how do we monitor that, and how do we try to map some flood control works for that? Okay, and monitoring and mapping of changes in the river course, like meandering rivers, which is a major problem, especially during flood events. And it happens in Ganga Basin, it happens in Brahmaputra Basin. So how do we encounter that? And that's something that can be easily be done through images that are obtained over, let us say, a few decades, to talk about meandering of river, changing the course of the river. Okay. And identification of river bank erosion, identification of chronic flood-prone areas, and also inputs that are essential for flood forecasting and warning models. So in all these places, remote sensing plays an important role. What we basically do is, when a flood event occurs, as soon as possible, we try to get an image, a satellite image or an aerial image of that region, analyze that, and try to provide that information almost in real time to the officials involved, like revenue officials, the district officials, etc., so that they can try to talk about mitigation. And this will be done almost in real time through various communication networks, including mobiles, amateur radio, etc. Now, what we try to get during a flood inundation is an image like this. Now, this is a satellite image, what you are seeing on the screen. Okay? And this image is in a satellite remote sensing terminology is referred to as standard false color composite. And on this image, whatever you are seeing in red color, trust me, is actually healthy vegetation. Okay, so whatever the red portion that you are seeing is all healthy vegetation. And then you can see the flood waters, and you can also see the black portions. These are all completely saturated soil. Okay, and it's like super oversaturated with a lot of water in it. And what is also important is these clouds. Okay. So the clouds problem is that as typically in India or most of the tropical regions, when the flood is occurring, it's mainly rain-fed. There could be some glacial outbursts, but mostly it's rain-fed. And it is rain-fed means you may be having cloud cover. And when you have cloud cover, we have a problem that in the portion where we have a cloud cover, we don't see what is there below it. And also the portion like cloud may have a shadow. In the shadow portion also, we don't see exactly what is happening. So to overcome this, sometimes we use other types of remote sensing. This is basically called optical remote sensing, but we also try to use microwave remote sensing to overcome this problem. Okay, because microwave can easily penetrate through the clouds, and therefore it will be like as if you don't have clouds on that image. Okay. So what you are seeing here is a portion of the Ganga River basin when the flood is taking place, and flood inundated area. And as I mentioned to you earlier, whatever you are seeing in red color is all vegetation, maybe cropped area or forest area. Now, this is for Ganga and this is from Brahmaputra. Some satellite images to give you an idea about how the flood inundated area can be easily be shown on a satellite imagery. Okay, and last time I'm mentioning this, what you are seeing in red color is all healthy vegetation. Now, as I said, in cloudy conditions, we have a problem of image not available over that region. Like in this portion, we don't know what is there below it. Is it flooded or it is not flooded? We don't know. To overcome this problem, we use microwave remote. Microwave simply penetrates through the clouds. So it's like as if you don't have clouds in that portion. So you will be able to see what is there below it. Okay. So, this portion that I'm showing here is for the entire Assam state when a major flood event is taking place. Okay. And in this entire image, you don't see even one cloud spot. That's because we are actually using microwave image. This is from RadarSat satellite. Okay. And this entire area is not covered in one image. So, for this portion, one image, and for this portion, one image, this is another image. There are 3 images. We prepared a mosaic of it. Okay. And then you can see, and then over that we try to put the Assam state outline boundary. That can be done through GIS. Okay. So then within this region, we are seeing where flood inundation is taking place in Brahmaputra river basin. Okay. And just to give you an idea, this is Guwahati city here. So this kind of map that we can prepare using microwave remote sensing will help us to overcome the situation if there are cloud covers within the region of our interest to study flood inundation maps. Okay. So that's an advantage if you try to use microwave remote sensing. Now, what we are basically doing is very simple. You try to acquire an image of the region of our interest before a flood event actually took place, and take an image of the same region when the flood event is taking place. Compare these two. Compare these two, pixel by pixel. In every pixel, here it is dry area. Okay, and here you are seeing some water. That means that pixel is inundated. In the same way, if you try to compare all this region, okay, you can see that entire area is now covered with flood waters. The main course of the river is like this, right? So this entire area is flooded. And what is flooded can also be seen. For example, if you see this kind of ash color, okay, that is all urban area. And if you see this kind of red color, it is all vegetation. And also you are seeing regular size or shape of this red color region. That means it's all cropped area, like rectangles or squares, etc. Okay, so this is all cropped area. So how much cropped area is submerged underwater? How much urban area is submerged underwater? How much fallow area is submerged underwater? Pixel by pixel, we can get the information. What we are doing is just comparing an image obtained during flood event and an image that is obtained before the flood event. And that helps us to talk about monitoring of the damage that is taking place in a flood event. Okay, and this can be further improved. For example, if I know that this urban area, is it a one town or one small area within the town, and what is the area of the town which is underwater and what is the area that is not underwater. Okay, so if you want to estimate that more precisely, what we can do is we can try to put this image over taluk boundaries, district boundaries, village boundaries, which may be available to us from GIS. So GIS will try to help us to get the damage assessment more precisely because of the other information that we may be having for that same region of our interest. Because this image will not directly tell you whether there's a town here and what is the name of the town, etc. But if you try to overlay this image over a transparent village boundary map or a taluk boundary map or a state boundary map, then we will be able to clearly see which portion is affected to what extent. So that is the next step that we try to do as far as GIS utilization is concerned. What we try to do as far as geographic information system for flood monitoring and damage assessment, we try to basically use it in 3 different stages for flood assessment. First of all, to prepare the database. This is just before the day actually the event takes place. We try to prepare a map base containing as much information as possible. For example, that may be hydrologic information, hydroclimatic information, or taluk boundaries, village boundaries, district boundaries, all these maps that may be available from different locations or different sources like revenue officials, irrigation department, water resource department. From all these departments, we try to collate all these maps and create a huge database of number of layers of maps. Okay, one layer may be just showing the village map, another layer may be showing the taluk map, like that, multiple layers. Okay, and if you want to talk about population density, you can prepare a map like that and prepare the database. The next question is data interpolation. If the rainfall is occurring, if you want to estimate what is the representative rainfall in a region, what we typically do, like Keeson polygon method or isohydral method, etc., can be done through GIS. And we can also try to question, what if I say that there is a village boundary, and within that village boundary, how many pixels are there? And if you know the size of 1 pixel, multiply that with the number of pixels, what is the area of that village, right? That kind of extraction of information can be done in the next stage. And the last stage is basically for knowledge extraction and dissemination. We try to visualize the flood map through satellite image, and if we try to visualize that over the taluk boundary, then we know how many taluks are inundated, and try to provide that information almost in real time through GIS. Web-based GIS or Google Earth Engine or Google Maps, etc. All those are coming under that category. So in all these 3 stages, GIS plays a very vital role. Just to give an idea, we have some satellite images which are trying to provide the information of the flood maps, and we have conventional database including topo sheets, geomorphic maps, socioeconomic data, etc. We put all of them in GIS, and we try to identify the most vulnerable population, which is likely to be more affected by the floods when compared to some other region, like the portions which are very close to the river bank are more inundated, more likely to be inundated. Okay, and like that. And also based on this data, we can try to do flood frequency analysis, etc. Then we prepare flood hazard map. This can be done a priori, and we can try to update it for a given event. Okay, and then what we can do, we can also talk about land use priority, including settlements, according to flood risk. And actually, this kind of maps that we prepare and analyze in GIS can also be used by an insurance industry to decide what is the premium that they should charge against flood damage. Okay, and that can be again done based on its vulnerability or flood hazard map that we have prepared. Okay. So everywhere it plays a very important role. And also, if you talk about land development, for example, if you want to urbanize a portion of a city, then you have to worry about what is its susceptibility to flood damage or flood hazard. Depending on that, you can decide the locations where you can go for further land development or leave them alone. So such things can be done through using both remote sensing and GIS. Just to give you an idea, one flood layer information that we have obtained from satellite, and that information, if you overlay it over village map that is obtained from, let's say, topo sheet or from revenue officials, then I can talk about the number of villages marooned. And if you have the land use land cover map obtained again from remote sensing or from any other source, and that flood layer is overlaid, then I can talk about submerged land use. Is it actually used for agriculture? Is it for urban area? Or is it for, let's say, road network, rail network, such things? Like if you have a rail network map, then I can talk about submerged railway lane within that portion. In the same way, submerged roads within that map. So what we are doing here is a common flood layer that is obtained from remote sensing. And these are all different layers that we have created in GIS. Okay, by overlaying one over the other, we will be able to answer specific questions that are required as far as flood damage statistics are concerned. Now, just to illustrate that portion, as I told you, from Brahmaputra River, what you are seeing here, so many small areas are all different villages or towns within one district called Marigaon district in Assam. Okay, so within this district, we are seeing so many villages, and on that we have put the flood inundation layer. Wherever you are seeing blue color portion, that portion there is a flood water. Okay, so if you try to look at these two together, then what happens? You can see that this village has no problem as far as flood is concerned. Whereas if you look at this village, the right portion of it is maroon, but the left portion of it is all right. Like that, for every village we can try to identify. In that context, we can also try to see where you should move the people to a safer area from this kind of map. And it is for the entire district, but if you take this small box and zoom it, you can see for each village, with the name of the village and every other details information provided here, we can see where floodwaters are there and where it is relatively safer without any floodwater. So such kind of detailed statistics can be obtained, and prepared maps can be prepared in a very short span of time, because all these map bases are already prepared by us and kept ready. The only thing that we were looking for is, as soon as a flood event occurs, one satellite image showing the flood inundated map. That's all. Right? So that's a way we can try to utilize this information. Now the third important tool that I want to use is called a digital elevation model, which in surveying class and everywhere we are very comfortable in doing that. Like if you take a dumpy level and try to measure the elevation information at regular intervals where the location of XY coordinates or latitude, longitude is known to you, put the staff gaze there and try to measure the elevation. And if you try to store that elevation on a computer system, it becomes digital elevation data. And if you want to play around with it, then we call it a digital elevation model. So that is what we will do for about next 10-15 minutes, to play around with digital elevation data. Okay. So what you can see here is, digital elevation data is shown in almost like a three-dimensional view, where you can clearly see this red line is like a boundary of the basin, or it is also called ridge line. Basically, the locally highest elevated points joined together. And if you look at this brown line, this is actually called valley line. That is the locally lowest elevated points joined together. And that's like river course or two streams that are joining here and flowing like this. Okay. So, why these two are important is, this ridge line talks about the boundary. So if rainfall occurs here, it will not have any influence within this basin. But if rainfall occurs within this basin, within this ridge line, the red boundary, then it will have an influence in the amount of flow that is taking place in this river course. So one of the easiest things that can be done through digital elevation data is to identify this kind of boundaries and different slopes. Drawing contours is one of the easiest thing that we can do through digital elevation data. So when we have the elevation data, we try to represent this elevation data in a three-dimensional fashion like this. Let's say this is x coordinate, and this is y coordinate, and this is z coordinate. So you are seeing these small boxes or small columns here representing elevation at that location. Now that, if you try to put a smooth line through them, like a spline or something, then you can visualize this as a three-dimensional surface. Okay, you have a peak here, you have another peak here, you have a valley here, and so on. Okay, so if you take this digital elevation data, we try to represent it in three different forms. One that you are very familiar with is drawing contours. Okay, you see it in topo sheets also. And one that we generally use in remote sensing and DEM terminology is gridded mode. That means for every grid box or a pixel, okay, we try to provide the elevation information. And based on that, we try to generate this kind of surface. Okay, this is also called relief map in surveying, if you remember that. Okay, so we can try to do that. And third one in which we try to represent digital elevation data is called TIN, Triangulated Irregular Network. This mode is basically used by industry benchmark GIS software called ArcInfo or ArcView. Okay, so it uses to store the spatial data using this TIN mode. What it does is that at the vertex of every triangle, at all these corner points, it tries to store the elevation information. So it is not regular grid like this. It's not like contour like this. But if we have the digital elevation data in any one of these forms, we can convert them to all other formats through GIS. Okay. So what I'll be doing is I'll be using digital elevation data in this gridded format for the next few slides. Okay. So if we are provided the digital elevation data in a gridded format like this, okay, then this is the digital elevation data, and using that we can talk about catchments, catchment delineation, and within that what small watersheds that we have and major basins. Everything is possible through this. What all we can do with the digital elevation data as far as hydrology and more importantly for floods is we can talk about flow direction, flow pathways, flow accumulation, stream network, catchment area, upstream contributing area, slope, aspect, and many other information. It is very easy. Just I want your attention for about 10 minutes. Okay. Within 10 minutes, I'll try to make you familiar with how to do all these things. What we have is simply one grid box. And in the grid box, for every box, we have some number. And that number is talking about the elevation for that box or for that location. Right? So let us start from there. Simple classroom kind of one. Okay. So we have a grid box here. This is a 3 by 3 grid box. Okay. And for for this box, at the center of it, the elevation is 67. 67, let's say, with respect to mean sea level or reduced level. Okay. And for this box, the elevation is 56, clearly indicating that this point is at a higher elevation when compared to this point. Okay. And like this, and this box itself is of same size, 1 unit. That 1 unit could be, let's say, 1 meter or 100 meters or 1 kilometer, whatever it is. Okay. So if we talk about 3 by 3, that means, if this is, let us say 1 meter, this is 3 meters in width and 3 meters in length. So we are talking about 3 by 3, 9 square meters area. And within that, for every square meter box, we know what is the elevation. So distance is known between two boxes and the elevation is also known. And next thing that we can do is, we can see that this point is at higher elevation when compared to this point, and this point, right? And what we can also do is we can try to find the slope. For example, in this direction, if you want to find the slope, elevation difference is 67 minus 53. and the distance is 1 unit. Okay, so 67 minus 53 by 1 is 14. So that is a slope in this direction, downward slope in this direction. So arrow indicates that in this direction it is sloping down, right? In the same way, in this direction also we can find out 67 minus 56 by 1. But if we want to find the slope in this direction, so elevation difference is 67 minus 44, but the distance is square root of 1 square plus square root of 1 square plus 1 square, Pythagoras theorem, right? So it will be square root of 2. That is the distance. So 67 minus 44 by square root of 2, that is 16.26. So what happened? We found the slope in this direction, in this direction, in this direction. Or if you are starting from here, we can find the slope in 8 possible directions, right? Along those 8 possible directions, try to find out in which direction we have the steepest downward slope. For example, in this case, from this point, you may have the steepest downward slope in this direction, right? So indicate that is the steepest downward slope. Why it is important? If the soil here is saturated and if some water falls here, water tries to move in the steepest slope direction, steepest downward slope direction, right? So what I will do now, for every pixel or for every grid box, I will find out the steepest downward slope among these 3 directions. Let us say this is the steepest. So I will replace this 67 with this arrow now in this direction, indicating, okay, that, you know, I'm just showing it for a much larger size, 5 by 5 now. Okay, you can see that for each box I'm showing the arrow. In this direction, water would flow. So the slope information, steepest downward slope information, now I have converted to flow direction. Okay, so this is the flow direction from this pixel or from this grid box, and this is the flow direction from this grid box, and so on. Okay, and you know, sometimes to put arrows like this in an Excel file, it may be difficult. So if you want to do it without arrows, you can try to use some notation. That notation is this. If we are having direction in this direction, put 1. In this direction, put 2. In this direction, put 4. Put 8. So numbers, okay, 2 power 0, 2 power 1, etc. Okay, for all 8 possible directions. So, you know, these arrows are also indicated by these numbers. These numbers are indicating particular direction in which water would flow. Okay, so from elevation data, by measuring the steepest downward slope direction, we now got the flow direction map. Then what we can do, we can now try to question, okay, what is flowing from here? Where is it going? It is going here. And from here, where is it going? It is going here. From here, where is it going? It is going here. So we can talk about the flow path. Okay, and flow path. So now from flow direction, we talk about the flow path. Okay, so this point, all these 3 points are connecting here. And from here, it is flowing here. So this entire flow path is shown here. You know, this flow path is nothing but, you know, this is one stream, this is another stream, this is another stream, this is another stream. All these streams are finally joining here. So the entire basin of 5 by 5 is draining into this location. 5 by 5 means 25 grid points are there. Okay, all those 25 grid points are draining into this location. So, you know, in a river basin terminology or watershed basin terminology, what we can call that this is the mouth of the basin. For example, on a larger scale, you know, if one grid is representing, let us say, 100 kilometers, let us say, for the sake of argument. Okay, then, you know, it's like Ganga, this is Yamuna, this is Saraswati, and so on. Right? So all these rivers can be depicted in this fashion. So what we again did, we just started with this elevation data, and now we got the flow path. Then the next question that we can ask is, you know, how many grid cells are contributing to a given location? For example, here to this box, there are 3 grid cells contributing. And if you look at this, okay, there are a large number of cells that are contributing, about 11 of them. And here only 1. And here, you know, that 11 plus this 12, 13, 14, 15. So about 15, like this. And here all 24. Right? So like that, we can try to find out the flow accumulation. Okay, so here we are saying there is no flow, only this cell, so 0 accumulation here, and only this cell is contributing. And here there are 3, and here there are 11, here 15, okay, and here 24. So within the flow path map, now we are showing how many number of cells are contributing at a given location. It also talks about the stream. For example, here only 3, so the stream itself will have a little discharge, but here it's 11. So stream width or the depth should be much higher to accommodate the flow from about 11 grid boxes. And here it is much more. So the river width or the river size will substantially increase with a large number of cells contributing. So that can also be ascertained through this flow accumulation grid. So simply I can ask a question. Tell me, within this 5 by 5 box, how many cells are getting at least 5 cells contribution? Okay. So then I can say that this, and this, these are the 4 boxes that are satisfying my criteria. Okay, flow accumulation with greater than 5 cell threshold. So these are the 4 important portions of the basin where considerable amount of flow accumulation is taking place. So we should be more concerned about, if you want to, for example, within this basin, if you want to construct a check dam, okay, if you construct this check dam here, you can harness the water from about 11 grid cells. And if you construct a check dam here, you can harness the water from about 15 grid cells, and so on and so forth. Whereas if you construct a check dam here, it's of very little use, like that. So you can decide the locations based on the flow accumulation that is taking place in each grid cell. Okay. So, then based on that, you can notice that this portion of the stream, and compared to the entire stream, this portion of the stream is very important because a lot of flow is taking place here, and then a lot more is taking place here. So you can talk about the major streams, minor streams, etc., based on that kind of threshold. Okay, and as I said, if you talk about one box or one cell, okay, that cell size is already specified because we know what is the length, and it's a square box. So if you know the size of it, you know area of it. Okay, so we know how much area is contributing. Okay. And what we can also do is that this is a stream network. Therefore, this is actually one sub portion of the basin, and there is another sub catchment. So we can try to identify different sub catchments within this basin. Okay. And all that, we can try to do it with one simple algorithm called D8 algorithm. It's called D8 because there are 8 possible directions in which we can consider. Okay, so we can do that. And in a nutshell, we start with elevation data. We talk about flow direction, flow path, flow accumulation, and then main streams. We can talk about subcatchments in different colors. I'm showing different subcatchments here. All that is possible through DEM. That's a very important component. And what we require is then the elevation data. Elevation data is also available from remote sensing. One that I'm showing you here is from SRTM, Shuttle Radar Topography Mission. It is not from satellite, but it is from a space shuttle. Okay, and this data is available to us for every location of the globe. For India, it is available at approximately 80 to 90 meter spatial resolution. That means for every 80 meter by 80 meter grid box, we have the elevation data available as one-time affair from this mission. Okay, and that data we try to utilize and do the simple classroom exercise that I have explained to you for a large portion. So this is the data that is downloaded. It is freely available. You can download it for any location of your interest. And this is for Karnataka State's Krishna River Basin portion. And if you try to do it for the entire Krishna River Basin, it's a large area. Okay, and if you try to do it for the entire basin and use the simple D8 algorithm to derive the drainage pattern for the entire basin, it looks like this. So dense, you don't really see drainage map here. Let me now try to zoom this small portion, this small rectangular box, red color box. Okay, you can start seeing some drainage pattern now, and you can further zoom this small portion here, and you can see how the drainage pattern details are obtained. If you remember, we have seen lines, straight lines, right? And those straight lines are small segments here, and they be curves like this, right away. Okay, but each portion for each grid box is simply a straight line. Okay, so you get all these kinds of detailed drainage map or given basin of our interest. So that is DEM. So all these three tools can be used, and my interest now, next 10 minutes, is to talk about identification of flood-prone area map using that simple concept of digital elevation model that I have told you. Slope, that's all. Okay, topographic information. Okay, and this is called modified topographic index. What I am interested is, when you talk about flood frequency analysis in hydrology, we generally say that flood of this magnitude may occur once in 50 years. Okay, so once in 50 years, a flood of, let's say, 5,000 meter cube may occur. That is the volume you specify. What I am interested to remote sensing GIS and DEM is, for that event, what is the corresponding flood map that I can provide? So for a 50-year recurrence interval flood event, I try to provide you a flood map. For a 60-year flood recurrence interval, I try to provide a flood map. Okay, not the magnitude. Volume is okay. Discharge also we try to provide sometimes. But what my interest here is to provide a corresponding map for that. Okay, so that can be done through a very simple approach, and I try to utilize that and try to demonstrate that for the entire Mahanadi River Basin using the simple approach. What we require is the DEM data, which we can download from SRTM or many multiple sources. I will show you some more sources for DEM. Okay, and use the simple concept of slope. Okay, so topographic index is nothing but log of area drained in the small portion by the slope, local slope in that region. That's all. This is the way we try to estimate what is known as topographic index. Okay, AD is the drained area per unit contour length, and tan beta is the local slope. And this is slightly modified afterwards, by bringing some power here. Okay, AD to the power of n. Okay, of course we are taking logarithm, so you can take n outside also if you want. And this is called modified topographic index. Our interest is, for a given digital elevation database, try to estimate this modified topographic index value for every pixel or for every grid box. Because for every grid box we know what is the area, and we also know what is the slope. Okay, both you have already checked with a simple classroom example that I have demonstrated. So get them and try to find out what is that TL. So while you are estimating this TL, what we need to do is we have to find out what is the n that you should use. And if you try to do that, when you get this topographic index value calculated for every pixel or for every grid box, okay, it is some number. Let us say it is in the range of 0 to 1. Okay. Now, what I will do is I'll try to check this value. Okay. And if this value is, let us say, greater than 0.9, okay, and that means it's at a very low elevation location, means that is likely to be flooded first. So as I keep on changing threshold values, larger and larger area may get inundated by flood. So what I will do is, for a given flood event, if I already have the flood inundation map available from satellite image, I compare that with different threshold values for this topographic index. I keep on playing around with this threshold, by changing it to a very small fraction, 0.75, 0.76, 0.78, etc., and prepare a flood map. Compare that flood map with the flood map that I already have. For some threshold value, those two will match. Then I will say, for that flood magnitude, this is the threshold I should use. I do that for a few flood events for which I have the flood maps available. Then, for any future flood event, if you specify the flood event, I try to find out what could be the threshold value that I should use. Therefore, I would be able to provide flood inundation map for any magnitude of flood event. Very simple, but very effective. So that's a concept that we are trying to use. Try to fix some threshold and prepare the flood map and compare that with observed map. and do it for a few flood events that you already have the flood maps, then you would have prepared for that Mahanadi basin, for a specified magnitude, what should be the threshold. You can do some linear regression, multiple regression, whatever it is, okay, and prepare that map. So while we are doing that, we try to look at two possible sources of error. One error is that, in a pixel that you have identified it to be flooded, if it is not flooded in the map, observed map, it is an error. Other portion is that, you have tried to identify a portion as non-flooded, but it is actually flooded in the map. That is also error. So these two sources of error we try to minimize. Okay, ER1 and ER2. We try to minimize them for all the number of pixels for which the flood inundation map is being prepared. Okay, and this is what we want to minimize. That's all. So we try to take the sum of these two errors, ER1 and ER2, okay, and play around with threshold and with this n for that exponent, okay, and play around. Only thing is, every time you are comparing a map that is generated by the threshold map and the map that is observed from, let's say, remote sensing. Then what happens is, compare two maps, compare that for every pixel, Mahanadi basin at 80 meter spatial resolution, you may be having a few millions of pixels. Okay, so for all those pixels, we try to find out the total of ER1 plus ER2. So it takes a lot of time to do it on a computer system, on our in a laptop. It took about 3 to 4 hours to find out one threshold for a given flood map. But that's a one-time exercise. Okay, and this whole work is done by one of my MTech students. Okay, so do that for as many flood events as possible. And we did it for entire Malaprabha Mahanadi basin, which is about 1,41,600 square kilometers. Okay, and this is the Mahanadi basin, and if you are familiar with this, Hirakud Dam is here, Burla, and downstream is always flood prone area. Okay, and as a matter of fact, Hirakud Dam itself is constructed mainly to take care of flood events. Okay, so we now try to prepare the flood inundation map and compare that what is actually observed. Okay. And what we did is that we try to use different sources of DEM. SRTM is one thing that I have already mentioned to you. Then ASTER is from satellite, global DEM, and GMTED is also from satellite, and this is also available at various spatial resolutions. Finest is at 30 meters, and coarsest is about 911 meters. 911 meters by 911 meters. Okay, is just one box, like almost 1 square kilometer. Okay, so we have elevation data at multiple sources, and we try to use each of these sources, prepare the flood inundation maps, and we had actually observed flood maps for 3 major flood events in Hirakud Dam. That's in 2006, 2008, and 2011. Okay, these are observed at Hirakud and Burla, but the damage map is for the entire basin. Okay, so that's how we try to prepare. Okay, and the maximum discharge that was measured is at one location called Naras. We have the data for about 38 years, and this 38 years of data was used actually to do flood frequency analysis. So, and this is done, and these 3 maps were also used. Okay, and then we try to prepare different DEMs. This is from ASTER Global DEM for Mahanadi Basin. Outline of the Mahanadi Basin is put here to get the data within this basin. And then we have this flood inundation maps available from National Remote Sensing Center, Hyderabad, for the 3 major events: 2006 event, 2008 event, and 2011 event. Okay, the water blue color portion that you are seeing here is all the inundated area, or flood water is standing there. Okay, so these are the portions that we try to locate and try to compare with the thresholds. So now what you do, simply run your program as many number of times as possible. What you are doing is very simple exercise here. Try to modify this n from 0.01 to 1 with a very minor, small increments. In the same way, try to change the threshold with a small number. Okay, prepare the map. For every iteration, you get one map. Okay, And that map you compare with the observed map and find out what is ER1 and ER2 errors. Add them. And you try to pick up for which threshold and for which n value you got the least error. And that is matching with that particular flood map. Okay, so that's what we did it through this. It's a tough exercise. You know, my student used to run this job on a laptop and go home to Mysore. And by the time she comes back, she would have done the iterations to do it for one map comparison. Okay. So that's the way this is done. And we prepare the maps, you know, for various spatial resolutions. We are trying to, I'm trying to give you the, what is the value that is found as the best for n, for TA, that is threshold, and also what is the total error that we have obtained, least error that we have obtained. And that is shown for different DEM resolutions starting from 900 meters up to 30 meters. Okay, and we found that among all these sources, you know, for SRTM data, that is at 90 meter spatial resolution, we are able to get the best results as far as flood map generation is concerned. Generally, with increase in spatial resolution, it should increase, but around 90 we got the best. Okay, so that's what we did it, and this is for 2006 event, this is for 2011 event, and this is for 2008 event. And the volume or magnitude is specified here. Actually, this is in discharge units. So 36.33 thousand meter cube per second was the discharge at Norwich, and this is much higher and is a lot more higher. Okay, so for all these three flood events, we prepared the flood maps and we compared the errors that we have obtained. Okay, so those maps can also be seen here. You know, this is a map that is generated for 2006 flood event from SRTM. I'm showing only for SRTM because we found it to be the best. Okay, and this is for 2008 event, and this is for 2011 event. You know, ideally speaking, if I had more flood events for which the maps are available, I would have done better. I have only 3 now, but let's say I have about all 32 years flood events. If I have the maps corresponding to that, then I can do much better in terms of preparing a map for any magnitude of our interest. That can be. This is just a classroom kind of, I mean, this is just an MTech project. But if you have more data, we can do much better in terms of preparing this kind of maps with a lot more reliability. So that's what we did as far as, you know, preparing a flood map for a given magnitude. That's the most important thing through the year. Now, finally, just want to put one last slide on this, you know, last couple of points. You know, WMO, World Meteorological Organization, has suggested that, you know, we should not treat this flood as a kind of a wastewater, flood water as a wastewater, but we should try to utilize that as a kind of a resource. Okay. So for that, you know, they try to talk about integrated flood management, where water resource management will try to utilize or conserve the waters that are coming through floods, land use management, and coastal zone management, and hazard management. All of them together, if you try to do, maybe we can utilize these floodwaters in a more effective manner rather than simply discharging the floodwaters into the oceans. So, you know, there are many suggestions, approaches that are suggested, like manage the water cycle as a whole, or integrated land and water management, manage risk and uncertainty. The problem, you know, sometimes, you know, it happened in Chennai floods, for example, is that if you try to take more risk by storing more amount of water for your future requirements, that's what was done for Chennai floods, if you recall. Okay, so they stored all the water for the first wave of flood, and then they are very happy that, you know, next summer is taken care because all the drinking water requirements for Chennai will be met in the next summer. But what happened is, when their tanks and reservoirs are full, another flood event happened. There is no way they could store that water. That was the risk that they had taken, and that was the uncertainty that they could not account. And because of that, when that flood wave started, they had to also release water from all these tanks. So it actually increased the magnitude or the amplitude of the flood. Okay, it created more devastation. So risk versus uncertainty, that's a big deal. All these things can be done. and reducing flooding, construction of dams, dikes, several structural measures, and reducing susceptibility damage. We can talk about non-structural measures, mitigating the impacts of flooding, by preparedness. If we prepare this kind of maps in advance, then we know which location people are to be put in safer locations, and where we should try to go for a crop which can sustain flood water for some period. So all those things can be done. Okay, and preserving, of course, natural resource, natural floodplains, zoning maps, etc., can be done through this approach. So, in a nutshell, if you try to use remote sensing, GIS, digital elevation model, and a reasonably good hydrologic model, okay, then we can talk about integration of all these tools for effective flood damage assessment, flood mitigation, flood preparedness, and flood warning. Everywhere we can try to use these tools very, very effectively. Now, if you want to look at the future scope in this domain, there's a lot of scope, still a lot of uncertainties are there. One is DEM data. For urban areas, what happens is the digital elevation data of 80 meters or 90 meters is too coarse. So we can try to have much finer spatial resolution data. And one possibility is to use LiDAR. And we also be interested in not DEM, but sometimes DTM or DSM, so that we know the building heights and other things also is a very important urban setup. Then stormwater drains need to follow. Stormwater drains that are there in urban area need not follow natural slopes, because you dig a drainage and it can follow. It can flow up the slope on the surface, but actually your drain will be sloping downwards in the direction. And such things can be taken into account. All other things, LULC, land use land cover changes, climate change effect, urban heat island effect in cities, and tidal effects in coastal cities, all those things can be taken into account. So to conclude, there is a strong potential for use of remote sensing GIS and DEM for flood hazard planning, mitigation, and management. And if we try to utilize these tools effectively, we can do much better. I'm done with my presentation, and I'm willing to take questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving us an insight of the issue. And I really amazed to see few points you addressed so well. Being a civil engineer, I was keep on thinking that what happened in a Kedarnath in 2013, where we lost a lot of lives. And during your presentation, I was keep on thinking that how we can control that, how we can make the peoples aware that how much that area is sensitive actually.
Yes.
Right, and your presentation was so focused upon that when I was keep on thinking at the same zeal that what happened at that time. And I pointed out that there are three different points, like you are saying that technology, like a remote sensing, we have a GIS, then we do have a DEM. And if we club that all the technologies, right, and apply on that what happened in a Kedarnath, ultimately with the help of professors like you, we can save a lot of lives as well. Right? Thank you so much. It was really enlightening to hear you. And I'm sure your future researchers, your scholars, and the students will be get benefited out of that.
Thank you.
Now,
nice.
Yes, sir, yeah. So now I request my co-chair Human to start a question-answer session, please.
Yes, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It was a very valuable presentation, sir. I will be just seeing we have some questions. So taking up questions, sir.
Yeah, Roman, if you don't mind, but if you can read out the question, I'll try to answer that.
Yeah, sir. We have a question from Sushant. Sir, my question is how to find out the depth of any river in the satellite imagery when we are comparing the river time lapse of 20 or 30 years?
Oh, okay. Good question. There are 2 points there, but let me address. You have really given me a good time frame. And you are referring to it as about 20 or 30 years. Okay. What we can try to do is that during the dry season, when the river is at its lowest depth, And there'll be some flow, but when it is lowest depth, we have the topographic information of the river bed, and that information can be converted to elevation data, and that elevation data, when a flood or when the river is flowing in normal course, if we have the corresponding water level, that water level minus the elevation at that pixel, that is the river bed, which is applied earlier, okay? And that gives you the depth, and depth of flow at every location for every pixel can be estimated at that scale for about 20 years, 30 years data. But in the real time, it is not very easy. I'm really happy that you asked me the question for about 20, 30 years data. It is relatively easy. But I mean, the question that I am trying to address here is that to get the bathymetric information, if the river is already flowing, okay, we get very little information about bathymetry below the water level, because most of the sensors available for remote sensing have very little depth of penetration into the water body. There will be a few meters. So anything that is deeper than that, we don't get the bed level information. So there, we had to collate other source of information regarding the river bed elevation, and only then we can get the depth information almost in real time. There is one new satellite, okay, which is going to be launched by NASA in 2022. And if that happens, the main idea there is to use a multi-sensor technology to get some information about the depth of flow. As of now, it is not very easy, but that satellite, when it comes into operation, it will have a more reasonable data source to estimate the depth of flow. Sorry, I took more time to answer this question. Yeah.
No, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Now we have another very important question, sir. We have a question from Dr. Runmai Manjari Sahu, and she asks, my question is, which hydraulic model would be best to simulate hydrological responses with respect to the uncertainties of flood forecasting?
Wow. Okay. There are, I will not say one model, but if I have to choose one, I will say HEC-RAS. Okay, HEC-RAS. That's good. It's freely available. It's from US Army of Corps of Engineers. Okay, you can try to use that software, that model, and try to model the floods in a given situation. It is also good if you want to use, let's say, in urban area, then you can try to use STORM, storm model. That is also good. But if you want to talk about uncertainty associated with it, and if you want to, first of all, develop a model in a basin, not only for floods, but also for other events like normal average flows, below average flows, etc., with reasonable reliability by considering the uncertainty associated with the parameters in the data, I would suggest that you go for what is known as SWAT CUPS. Okay, SWAT-CUPS. Okay, and that, what it does is, SWAT is basically SWAT hydrologic model, but when you try to do it, or when you try to calibrate it using CUPS, it tries to account for considerable amount of uncertainty of all the data that you are using and also all the parameters that you are modeling. That way, SWAT CUPS is good, and you can try to use that.
Thank you so much, sir. Taking up another question, we have a question from Dr. Pushpender Kumar Sharma. Can we predict the time of concentration?
Time of concentration, what happens is, I think how to draw what are known as isochrones. Okay? Isochrones are basically drawn based on the digital elevation, or basically elevation data, or topographic data. So therefore, we can draw isochrones even using the DEM. And when you do that, then you not only you get the time of concentration, the longest time that it takes from the farthest point to the mouth of the basin, but you can also get different intervals of times of concentration. For example, this entire area will drain in 3 hours, whereas this area will drain in 4 hours, 5 hours. That kind of isochrones and the corresponding time of concentration contours can be drawn through DEM. So it's possible, and it's a physical aspect. That means, it's based on the topography of the basin. Therefore, it should be possible to estimate what is the time of concentration for a given basin.
Yes, sir. I would be taking one last question, sir. I would be taking one last question. We have question from Rohit Moria. And Rohit Moria says how landfill and solid waste dumping site can be modeled and remediate it in case rainwater leachate generation inside the landfills.
Beautiful. I like that question. What we try to do, if you look at the landfills, especially if you look at that landfill near Noida, it doesn't look like a landfill, it looks like a hill, a huge hill, right? So when we have such large landfills, first thing that we can do is that if we try to acquire an image of that same area much before we started landfill, okay, because data is available from, let's say, 1970 onwards. Satellite images are available for that location. So try to pick up those maps or those images which are there before you started landfilling. And as the landfilling happens, it won't happen in one day. It happens over a period of time. So by looking at the multiple dates of images, we can try to look at the progression of how the landfill is advancing or evolving. And based on the past data that we have, we also know what is the land use, land cover within that landfill region. Therefore, we know the locations where there is going to be more amount of infiltration than compared to the locations where we have less amount of infiltration. So for every pixel, we can identify them. And therefore, we can try to identify the locations where we may have leachate problem and the locations where we will not have. Mitigation measures like, lining, providing some, what you call clay layer or something like that in those spaces, in those geotextile material, etc., to prevent leachate moving downwards or to the lateral movement and arrest it in the locations where you are sensitive, where are not to be polluted. In such locations, you can try to effectively assess that and try to talk about the places where you should take care using all these three tools together. That is remote sensing for land use, land cover, GIS to locate them, and DEM to talk about the slope. So it's possible. It's possible, but not very easy. I'm just saying, at this stage, I try to give you a very nice picture of it.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for such an informative session. It was a very informative session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking up the queries of our audience. On behalf of School of Civil Engineering, Lovely Professional University, and from the entire team of faculty members and students, I'm very thankful to you, sir, for spending quality time with us. We wish you all the good health and prosperous life ahead. Thank you once again, sir.
Thank you very much. I really
Now, a
enjoy.
very small, yes, thank you, sir. Thank you. I have a very small announcement for the attendees. Please stay connected with us as we have more sessions lined up for today as well as till 22nd of May for the Enviro Web Talk Series 2021. All of you will be receiving the links on your emails, so kindly keep your emails checking and join the sessions as scheduled. Thank you all. Please stay safe. Once again, thank you to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Aman, for doing it very nicely. And thank you, Mr. Jasprit Singh. And thank you, Amit. Wonderful. Bye-bye.